The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. As Ireland commemorates the centenary of the 1916 Easter Rising against British rule, echoes of that conflict continue to reverberate through the current political environment. Following a national vote that failed to give any one party a clear majority, leaders are currently working to resolve an electoral stalemate. As the political horse trading involved in forming a coalition government proceeds, observers note the impact the 1916 Rising and its aftermath still exert on 21st century Irish politics. To help us examine how the heavy hand of history is still being felt by the present generation of Ireland's leaders, we're joined by two keen observers of the nation's past and present political scene. Timothy McMahon is Associate Professor of History at Marquette University. He also serves as Vice President of the American Conference for Irish Studies. Stephen O'Sullivan is a transplanted Dubliner who has been living and working in Milwaukee since 1999. He travels frequently to Ireland and between trips is a voracious consumer of Irish media. Welcome both of you to International Focus.
Thank you.
Well, Timothy, I'm wondering if maybe you could set the stage for us and tell us what exactly is going on in the political environment right now.
Well, thank you, Doug. Ireland has just gone through an election in which the coalition which had governed, which featured Fine Gael and the Labour Party, saw its support, its electoral support, I wouldn't say evaporate, but go down considerably. It especially hit the Labour Party hard, which in the previous government, Labour had, I believe it was 37 seats. And as a result of the most recent election, they're only at 7. So that's a significant drop. Fine Gael also lost seats. They're at 50 seats after the election, which is down about 26. So neither a collection of those two parties would not get you the majority you need in a 166-seat Dáil-Éireann. The other thing to keep in mind here is that traditionally the two largest parties in the Irish Republic have been Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. Now, Fianna Fáil fell off the electoral map in 2011, largely because of its association with the Celtic Tiger and then the collapse of the Irish economy in 2008. And yet Fianna Fáil's numbers did go up in this most recent election, but again, not nearly to the extent they would need to form a government. They and Fine Gael are the two largest parties in the present Dáil, but they also have a difficult time even considering working together. So that complicates things as well.
So, Stephen, talk a little bit about just the broad outlines of how the government's structured. There's a popularly elected president, but he's not head of government.
No, not really. Most of the power resides in the legislature, which is called the Dáil. The government is formed typically for the last 30 years by a coalition of one of the main parties, either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, and one of the smaller parties like Labour or the Progressive Democrats, who are no longer on the scene. And then it's all about who can put together a coalition or have enough seats in order to implement their policies and have that majority, which I believe is 57 or 58. Is the magic number in order to be able to implement your policies. The role of the president, not the same as it is here in North America, in the US. It's more of a titular role. However, it could be interesting based on the current situation because the president does have some constitutional roles insofar as if the present Dáil, as it's elected, is unable to form a coalition, then it's within the remit of the president to, if you know, rather than call a fresh election, it's within his remit to say no. You got to go back under your present structure and keep talking and put together a working coalition.
And the president also is the only popularly elected individual by the entire country, right? So this, whereas you know, in a parliamentary system, the Taoiseach, or the head of the government, roughly the prime minister, if you will, is elected only by a single constituency and is the leader of generally speaking, the largest party. The president is actually popularly elected by the entire state.
Correct. And then the Taoiseach, which would be the deputy leader, typically will come from the minor party in the coalition. Right.
So we said at the outset that there's this connection to the politics that really started with something being currently commemorated, the Easter Rising. Walk us through, knowing it's perilous to ask a historian to talk about these things, and we only have a limited amount of time, but talk a little bit about the Easter Rising and the War of Independence, Civil War, as it pertains to the current situation.
As you say, that's complicated. The Easter Rising, which took place, we're actually coming up on the 100th anniversary, April 24th, would be the actual beginning of the Easter Rising in 1916. This was, in many ways, the product of an underground revolutionary organization known as the Irish Republican Brotherhood. But even within that organization, there was a smaller group that was known as the Military Council that planned this rebellion. Remember, we're talking about the context of the First World War, 1916. You're about midway through the First World War. And there had been a nationalist movement in Ireland throughout the 1800s and especially after the 1870s that called itself the Home Rule movement, which sought an independent parliament for domestic affairs but would have kept Ireland within the British Empire. The Irish Republican Brotherhood wanted a fully independent republic that would not have been a part of the empire. The rebellion was suppressed after about 6 days, and while those who carried it out were an outlier even among the nationalist community, significant sympathy for their cause emerged in the next couple of years, in part because of the heavy way that it was put down and the arrest of thousands of people who had absolutely nothing to do with it. This led in 1918 to an electoral shift. There was an election at the end of the First World War that saw many people voting for an independent state, more so than Home Rule would have given. In conjunction with that, you see the emergence of a guerrilla war, sometimes referred to as the Irish War of Independence. And when that was concluded in 1921, a treaty between the revolutionary government and the British state created what was known as the Irish Free State. But within the revolutionary movement, there was a great division over that treaty. And so this is what leads, in fact, to the foundations of the current party system.
So talk a little bit, Stephen, about Michael Collins and that agreement and what the issues were.
Well, it goes back a long way. So Michael Collins would be more on the pro-treaty side.
What were the details of the broad outlines of the treaty were?
Well, you probably need to go a long way back, probably back towards the 1880s when the scope of politics in Ireland was there was a Irish nationalist party that wanted home rule for Ireland. Home rule, each time the bill was passed in Westminster, it was overturned by the House of Lords. By 1914, it was imminent that home rule was going to be allowed for Ireland, and what happened then was the First World War, put everything on hold basically, and then what happened is basically the
The Anglo-Irish War or Irish War of Independence comes along at that point. What among the factors you have to keep in mind here is that within the context of the First World War, the administration in Britain changed. So you go into the First World War with a liberal government in place, and they're sympathetic to Home Rule. They've in fact helped to carry it through Parliament. But in the context of the First World War, Britain becomes a national government, a coalition itself, and among the people in that coalition were Unionists, people who opposed the concept of Home Rule. And those Unionists and their allies in the British Conservative Party sought a way to, if you will, partition the island to maintain a connection between areas with high concentrations of Unionists and the United Kingdom, which wouldn't have been allowed in a Home Rule or even the so-called Irish Free State. By the time the treaty is negotiated in 1921, you already have in existence a 6-county state that's known as Northern Ireland. And so one element of the treaty that was really controversial was that Northern Ireland was acknowledged as a distinct statelet by the treaty. Collins, you brought up Michael Collins, he was one of the 5 people who signed the treaty and had negotiated the treaty from the Irish side. And so when they brought it back in December of 1921, he was one of its chief advocates.
Well, let me read a quote from him, who characterized the treaty as not the ultimate freedom that all nations aspire and develop, but the freedom to achieve freedom. Mm-hmm. So that was very much his position. This is about as far as we're going to go at this point. Let's take what we can get, right? And so there was another faction that said, you know, there are 32 counties. It should be a 32-county Irish state, right? And this idea of splitting off the 6 that became Northern Ireland was not acceptable.
Well, and the whole thing about the commemorations, it actually sparks a really good debate on the legitimacy of whether the Easter Rising was necessary in the first place, or whether this Home Rule would have been just as equal as what the treaty, which occurred after 1916 and the War of Independence up to 1921, would it have achieved the same thing. So I think it's been interesting. Back in Ireland, the commemorations, they sparked a real debate and an examination on whether it was justified or not, or whether the same goals and the same aspirations would have been achieved just via political means.
And so how do those differences in whether we go for the half a loaf being better than none or the whole thing reflect themselves in, you mentioned the 2 traditional big parties.
Right. Well, just to follow up on that last point, and then the emergence of the parties, a significant the treaty gave the Irish Free State considerably more authority and power than Home Rule would have. For example, under the Home Rule settlement, the Irish state would not have had the power of taxation. They would not have had control over their own police forces or been allowed to have their own army. The treaty allowed for all of those things. So, but it also not only maintained the existence of the 6-county Northern Ireland, it also said that representatives in the Irish Parliament had to remain had to give an oath of loyalty to the British Crown and to see the Free State as a dominion within the British Empire. And so the divisions that really emerged were over this concept of sovereignty, right? Is Ireland a sovereign nation in and of itself? And those who opposed the treaty tended to say that the republic that was declared in 1916 was in fact still in existence. They had been fighting for it for years, and they weren't going to back down on that now. And what Collins was saying was, we're not in a position at this point to put that forward. What we will do from here on out is build it from within, right?
Well, one of the main one of the main differences was that oath of allegiance to the king, and but the result of the treaty was actually that Ireland remained as a dominion. Indeed. It was part of the Commonwealth, and I think it's been an interesting conversation, that's going on in Ireland right now and during the commemorations on whether the same thing would have been achieved without the rebellion and without.
I'm going to stop you right there. We'll take a short break and we'll talk a little bit about how those parties that developed have their analogs in today's political scene. But first, we'll take a short break.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back. We're exploring Irish history and politics with Timothy McMahon and Stephen O'Sullivan. Well, we were talking a little bit about that formative period of 16 to 22 or so, and talk a little bit about how the parties that are extant now really flowed from that.
Well, in the mid-1920s, the leadership of the anti-treaty side, people like Eamon de Valera, formed a new party that was known as Fianna Fáil. And they entered opposition in Dáil Éireann in 1927. By 1932, they were elected as the largest party, and they formed a government in the Irish Free State. And one of the interesting developments that had happened in the 20s, to build off of something that Stephen said earlier, within the Dominion, with Dominion status, the Irish Free State leadership of the 20s had pushed for a transformation, along with other dominions, within the British Empire, granting greater freedom to the dominions to essentially rewrite laws. De Valera, when he comes in 32, he and his party begin to do that. And they externally associate the Irish Free State, what they would come to call ERA, with the British Empire. They basically say, we're out. And one of the ways they do this is by writing a new constitution in 1937, right? It was 37 that it was adopted. This put Ireland into a brand new relationship outside of the empire, and that was a major step forward. Ironically, following that stepping stone path, I think that Collins ideally would have seen.
But one of the main questions is, the treaty and the resulting partition. Would Ireland have been a better country if partition hadn't happened? If you take a look at that constitution that was written in 1937, the special position that the Catholic Church had in that constitution, one gets to wonder whether Ireland would have been a richer country, a more diverse country than what really happened. There's a lot of people who think, yes, we gained our independence. The role of the Catholic Church that subsequently happened would that have occurred if Ireland had been a united country? And it goes back to the Home Rule thing. Maybe Britain's biggest mistake was not granting Home Rule, and that form of devolution, probably we would be in a better situation, a more peaceful situation that didn't result with all the violence and carnage that subsequently occurred.
Well, this is I think a view that is colored very much by what happened in the latter part of the 20th century. Certainly the two states that were set up on the island, and we need to remember the demographics of the island. The largest concentration of Protestants on the island are in the 6 counties that are known as Northern Ireland. The state that was created in the Irish Free State, subsequently the Irish Republic, had such a strong Catholic population, roughly 94%, I want to say, whereas the northern state at the time of its creation was roughly 65% Protestant of various denominations. Had the 32 counties been together, you would have had a much more diverse state in terms of population.
Definitely less polarized.
Yeah, but the other thing to keep in mind here is that the educational system in which the Catholic Church had such a strong role in the Irish Republic had actually been in place where you had state-funded, what we would call public schools in the United States. You had state-funded education that was largely under the control of the clergy, whether it was Catholic or Protestant, under the United Kingdom. So what was put in place after 1922 in both countries was largely the legacy of the pre-independence era. So I think the Catholic Church would have had a different role if there had been a 32-county state. And certainly it would not have had the, as you say, the constitutional special position that it ultimately did, though that in and of itself was changed in a referendum in the early 1970s.
So let's jump back to present day again. What does the current impasse tell us about the political environment right now? I mean, is this just more of the same, or is this something different? And is it related in some way to the economy of the 21st century?
I think it's more associated to the economy. Yeah. I think Ireland is still in the throes of recovering from the shock of the financial crisis, the subsequent bailout, the ignominy of being bailed out by the IMF, and even being bailed out by the UK government. I think what you're seeing now is a direct consequence of the austerity, and so now what we're left with is a kind of a fractured political situation. And even the main two parties, because it actually threw up an interesting situation where we could have the two main parties who have their legacy back at the Civil War, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael. It was actually on the cards that those two parties could come together and form a grand coalition, which would have been very interesting and would have moved Ireland maybe towards more socio-economic, like left versus right kind of situation that you have in other European countries. But it looks like that's not going to happen. I think as we sit here right now, it looks like we're probably looking at a Fine Gael led minority government that's going to be more or less going to be beholden to the opposition and Fianna Fáil and the other parties, kind of not dragging it down at an inopportune moment. So definitely doesn't lend itself to being very stable. But it is what it is, and as people in Ireland say, the people have spoken, and that's what politicians have to deal with.
You know, we've talked a lot about the sort of Civil War era legacy of the two major parties. Can you put them easily on sort of a right-left continuum?
Definitely not. As I said, I think one of the phrases that we use is those two parties. They're not wide apart, but they're deep apart. It goes back very deep, the difference. It goes all the way, as we said earlier, back to the Civil War. These were both parties that were part of Sinn Féin, and Fianna Fáil being the anti-treaty and Fine Gael being more pro-treaty, or a result of parties that were pro-treaty, even the Southern Unionist parties.
It's also, you know, and part of the thing that makes this so intriguing as well, and why the depth of that division remains so important, is that several constituencies have basically been handed down almost from father to son, or father to daughter, mother to son, over the course of generations. So you actually have these families who have great control, or great power at least, for winning elections, and those divisions aren't forgotten. You know, we've got long memories, I think.
Yeah, it's more tribal. You know, growing up in Ireland, I mean, Fianna Fáil were they were the people who'd go to the GAA games. It was more the working man's party. Fine Gael were perceived as being the people who went to the rugby games, the party of the big farmers and the people, you know, in business and business holders. And but it really would have been interesting. And as far as policies are concerned, there is not really all that much between them. Mm-hmm. Basically, Fianna Fáil were there at the time of the bailout, and when the Troika was there, and have been largely responsible for implementing what the stipulations of the Troika, And then subsequently, the next government, which was Fine Gael, have really just continued with those policies.
Carrying them forward, yeah.
So we've got just about a minute left. I'd like to read you an Irish Times op-ed quote from earlier this week. It said, "We are watching the passing of an era of majority-only governments. This is a moment of transition from strong, big party-dominated administrations to a fragmented political landscape." So is that what we're seeing now, going forward?
Whether it continues beyond this electoral cycle, I don't know, but I do think it's possible that that's what we're going to see. The fact is that, there hasn't been majority government. There have been coalitions which have created majorities. But what we're seeing now is a wider spread of the electorate, and that's going to create a situation where it's more difficult to find a majority coalition.
Proportional representation as well is the system. The single transferable vote system is what's used in Ireland, and that does tend to lend itself to create a more diverse or fractured situation where the only options really are coalition
Right.
governments.
Well, we've got a dynamic situation we'll have to keep an eye on. Timothy McMahon, Stephen O'Sullivan, thank you very much. To our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,